Christiane emailed us. She emailed us at questions@askjoedimatteo.com. You can email us there as well. Hi there. I've been battling myalgic encephalomyelitis for over 8 years. I was diagnosed after I never fully recovered from mono. I am 48 and finding that exercise is getting more difficult for me, and I'm needing to rest more and more. I know some of it is aging, but want to be able to increase my energy at least a bit. Any suggestions for a nutraceutical or supplement? My PCP only wants to prescribe pain meds. Thank you. Loving the new podcast. Worked with Joe often in the past. He is always missed, but so happy to see you guys carrying on his mission. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. All right, guys, let's help her out. Christiane, myalgic encephalomyelitis.
A lot of different ways, I'm sure, to start this. You know, I just...
Well, so what is this that she's dealing with? What I've never even heard of this.
Yeah, so that the fancy name, it's just another name for chronic fatigue syndrome. So I think it's a good place to start.
Yes, I was gonna
Chronic fatigue syndrome.
Chronic fatigue.
I know what each of those words means individually. Together, they sound awful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that framing it as the myalgic encephalomyelitis, I think, has given patients dealing with this more, feel more, make it feel like it is an actual illness that needs treated, where I think a lot of people were dismissed in the past with, as nebulous and difficult as this is to diagnose. A lot of people may have felt unheard, unseen, overlooked with the chronic fatigue syndrome, titling. But nonetheless, that is another name for it. And so in looking at some of the symptoms, as she mentioned, we see individuals with significantly lowered ability to perform routine or previously normal tasks due to this fatigue. This previously tolerable level of activity then ultimately causes a worsening of symptoms, which is known as post-exertional fatigue. A lot of times they'll see issues with sleep, full nights of sleep, then kind of do nothing to help improve the symptoms that are sort of already starting to occur. And then in addition to this, from a diagnosis standpoint, one of the following is often present or must be present. Brain fog is a huge one, or any kind of other notable issues with cognition. Orthostatic intolerance is another huge one, which basically just means that, individuals will have issues when going from sitting to standing quickly. You notice that lightheaded feeling, which you can experience from time to time, but in this population, it is very much noted. And then chronic pain is also very common. And I know I kind of just jumped in, kind of into the symptoms there. It's
a syndrome. That's what it is a grouping of symptoms, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, this is another condition that doesn't come without controversy, and it's all stuff that hopefully we can kind of unpack here. But just at the outset, you want to add some stuff.
And I think along those lines, I think that a key thing to mention is, I remember 10, 15 years ago that this was even just in talks or in articles you would read, or that it was essentially not accepted.
Yeah.
That it was a real, and I think that's where Dante started a really good point by kind of using the technical term, and I noticed she used it too instead of chronic fatigue, because there's been some negative connotations associated with that. And I think it's one of those things that, yes, if you truly have it, that is a brutal barrier to have to kind of jump over. But as from a clinician side, you've got to start there, because it could be, and I don't mean to minimize these things, these are very serious things. I'm just saying some of these collection of symptoms, it can be just, I don't mean to say that word, depression. It can be just a
like
thyroid.
a singular. It could be more of a targeted diagnosis of something else.
Yes,
tons of overlap,
including mental health issues. You could be trauma. You're dealing with a trauma. So there's so many things that can still build up and be a part of true chronic fatigue. Can be a differential diagnosis or be the lone, again, air quotes, cause of the chronic fatigue. So I think that is something that, even if, this is something maybe you feel like you're dealing with or you're trying to unpack, that if you are getting what feels like a stiff arm, so to say, or pushback from a clinician, I don't think it's because they're saying that chronic fatigue doesn't exist or anything. It's just that that's part of the process to unpacking this, is to get them. I'm sure we can get there, but is some of the workup.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think a key thing too is that this kind of post-exertional malaise or this essential diminished capacity just to do routine tasks, when it persists over 6 months, and there's not really an ebb and a flow, like, well, I didn't sleep really good for the last 3 days, so I was tired the next 2, but then I got some, there's not really like much of an ebb and flow to it. It's a pretty consistent lack of ability to do those basic things. It can delve into even other specific things, such as confusion and mood swings, some of those mental brain fog things Dante brought up, even into some lymph node issues, especially if it's post-infection, sensitivity to light, headaches. So it can go into so many different manifestations. That I think that that's also what makes it difficult. But I think what we don't know for sure the cause, but some of the links we're saying 1 in 10 people who have had Epstein-Barr virus, which is the precursor to mono essentially, or can be. Ross River virus, also Coxiella burnetii, which is a bacteria that actually affects farm animals that can at times be transmitted. 1 in 10 people who have had that and who have recovered or seemingly recovered meet the criteria for symptoms of chronic fatigue. So you're seeing it linked to an immune system response to having those types of infections, such as the actual clinical way that it plays out can be again, these are somewhat hypothetical, but a chronic production of cytokines. So it's cytokines or it can be inflammatory, involved in the acute inflammatory response, such as interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha. Something like tumor necrosis factor alpha is involved in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, things that you hear linked to autoimmune conditions.
I was just going to say, so this is something, it can be an autoimmune?
It can be
type of thing?
Yes, your body's response to having those infections named.
Wow.
Prior. Even just not to go off into these things, but sugars, can release some of these pro-inflammatory cytokines. So if you, again, I'm going to keep trying to draw that it becomes a syndrome of not only symptoms, but also maybe you've had this infection, maybe you've had an environmental exposure, maybe you've had chronic stress. And so these things have kind of come together and your body has responded in a certain way. So I think the symptoms themselves become very multi-systemic, affecting a lot of different things from mental to physical to, and then the causes or the roots of them can also be multifactorial as well. So I that's what personally that I have seen in trying to get to what can be the root of this, is that it could be multifactorial.
Dang. Mm-hmm. That stinks. Okay. So she says she's been dealing with it for 8 years. So presumably, and it's from mono, never fully recovered from mono. So I assume
which is the Epstein-Barr.
Right.
So that was, yes.
So she hasn't had the ebbs and flows. It's been a consistent problem for 8 years. That's rough. And she's trying to exercise. So that's a good thing. Does she need to, I'm guessing based on what you're saying, it doesn't matter to some extent how much she rests. If she has this, it's not just a matter of she needs to get an extra hour of sleep at night. She's just going to feel that way.
Yeah, it is tough. And to, just shed further light into the difficulty of some of these recommendations. It's that because we don't have really any clue what's causing this specifically, we have these hypotheses, we have these hints, and we have these things that tend to be more associated with this, after those other conditions have resolved. It's just that then that leaves you in a position where you just often see symptom management and tons of supplements recommended and tons of questionable experts in a field such as this. And so that's why it's very hard to make concrete recommendations. And there's even been controversy with different papers, different studies that have come out about it. So there was the XMRV retrovirus, which was actually, there was a retracted paper that they took off out of the publications, that there was this specific retrovirus that they felt was linked to most people showing, the symptoms of chronic fatigue. Yeah. Later found that it was just issues with the actual blood testing, or there was something with the lab. And so,
whoopsie.
So it just has like this, in addition, in addition to it being sort of a nebulous thing to try and diagnose, you then have these unfortunate situations where you start hearing a paper was retracted, or this trial was nonsense, or the results of this trial were way overblown and it really doesn't work. Then you really start to paint such a negative picture on this, and it makes it difficult for patients actually dealing with this. So I don't know. Does saying all that really do a whole lot? No, but it just kind of shows how hard it is to really put some black and white context to
Hopefully it helps to build empathy around this, that this is a big deal, and there's a reason that Christiane and other people like her probably struggle, not just because of the issues they're having, but also because so many people don't take it seriously, because it's got bad science around it.
Yep.
And lack of science around it.
Right. Yeah. But I think, and again, there's just so many different angles. Even the way I have this framed here kind of goes off in different ways. But I think back to Christiane specifically, it's difficult without kind of asking her more questions to get to an answer for her. And hopefully in the midst of talking about it in general, I guess is kind of the approach I would take. Because I even just see some things here back before it was really, we'll call it, accepted in 1984. There was literally an outbreak of it. I thought this was really interesting. An outbreak of CFS, then thought to be chronic Epstein-Barr. So the CDC eventually showed up. It was a town outside of Lake Tahoe. And that's where, again, you see the converging of symptoms. I mean, there was even a doctor who called it the depressed menopausal women disease, and then that was published after having gone up there. Then in the press, they got the nickname of the yuppie flu. So again, this is how helpful this is. That's very debatable. But again, these are just things that I found, and I think it goes back to just the general gist of this. So 10 years later, after that, they kind of went back and really studied what was going on, because I think they started to find that there were they found elevated antibody titers to herpes virus, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus. So they believe that in this area, there was potentially a toxic outbreak of blue-green algae from Lake Tahoe. It's that right outside of Lake Tahoe. So now you've got the environmental factor.
Yeah.
And then they also found, again, that potentially with those elevated titers, that there may have been a particularly virulent strain of herpes virus 6 that was in the area.
Wow.
So you've got this converging. Again, some of these things are so complicated. And I think if you do try to say, hey, this is exactly, in Christiane's case, it seems a little more black and white, but in other people's cases, how can you really pin down something like this? So say that to kind of bring it back down to what Dante brought up, which was individual symptom management. So the only medication that broadly has even come close to helping chronic fatigue as a whole is a medication that's brand named Ampligen.
Okay.
And it's an immunomodulatory drug. 2007, 2009, it had gone through the FDA process. It was not approved, lack of effectiveness data.
Wow.
But in 2021, it was back under review. Okay. So we have a gap here from, we're a year and a half, 2 years later. I don't know where exactly it stands, except for open label use. So essentially, it just means that there are trials. When you hear if patients are in trials for, usually it's a cancer drug or things like that. That's essentially what that means. There's a physician in Nevada, coincidentally, near Lake Tahoe, and then in North Carolina that are conducting essentially trials on the drug. So outside of that, because of its immunomodulatory effect, everything else here, even I went into some things that didn't work, and I don't know how beneficial that is, but our symptom management.
Okay.
And that's going to be critical here, is what exactly are you dealing with? And I think primarily too, especially maybe not in Christiane's case, but the full traditional medical workup, thyroid, iron, B12, blood sugar, how much that can affect energy level and moods, blood pressure, your sleeping patterns, all those things. Again, they're not going to be this one thing is the answer, but if you can start to piece together along with different exercise routines, etc., food, diet, we can go into all those things. But you can start to piece together things that can help you maybe not get over chronic fatigue, but can help your symptoms, then it gets you maybe closer to where you need to be.
Right. Especially, I mean, if you can, if it turns out that you've got multiple things like you're talking about, all factoring into that, if you can fix those individual issues, it might help alleviate symptoms of the chronic fatigue as a whole.
Definitely. And pain gets very complicated because especially if you end up, God forbid, at the narcotic level, because those medications, they can give you an energy initially, but over time, the tolerance and the harm that they do to your body over time, really, and even in men, lowering testosterone levels, and then you need them to get even energy levels back. It becomes a really two-edged sword for these people, that it ends up helping their pain in the short term, and even potentially giving them some energy, depending on how your body individually reacts to it. But what it leads to down the road is only going to set you further and further back. So I would caution to whatever degree possible to avoid those, except in extreme cases.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's help Christiane. What does she need to be doing in terms of exercise first? Is that she's trying to exercise. She's 48 and she's worried that that's maybe why she's losing energy. Boy, I hope that's not the case, because that's not that far down the road for me. I don't want to lose steam at 48. What does she need to be doing on? What should she focus on in her training?
Yeah, this is a fascinating area, in my opinion. Because a lot of times you just hear, man, if you just exercise more, if you run, if you participate in these certain activities, it's going to be a boost in endorphins, and you're going to feel better, and all these sorts of things, where it's in the population suffering with these symptoms, suffering with this syndrome, it kind of has the potential to do the opposite. And there even have been some studies where they have kind of exercise management strategies that they'll call adaptive pacing therapy. They have graded exercise. And so these sorts of things are kind of what the names are sort of implying. Graded exercise exposure, you kind of just find a baseline for somebody and you start to titrate up as needed, and it sounds really good. Adaptive pacing theory is just another way to do kind of handle some of these things from a more like cognitive behavioral therapy perspective.
Sure.
And there were some individuals that even that this wasn't enough, and there were people in some of the trials whose symptoms were worse.
Wow.
And so it's very tricky. It's a very fine line when you're trying to find the right amount of exercise. But at the same time, that doesn't mean we just say stop exercising either.
Right.
And so the ultimate advice, I would say, and it's honestly at this point what I would recommend to anybody, and it's finding the appropriate entry point. And so you're going to have to play around a little bit. And so the idea with some of these pacing and graded exercise therapy sort of thoughts, the energy envelope theory is another one that's mentioned. They're all kind of saying the same thing. The idea is to participate in tolerable levels of physical activity or activities in general that are congruent with how you're feeling on a given day. And so always trying to find, I've even seen somewhere that said like, imagine your energy is like a bowl of marbles or a cup of marbles. I saw that on like a support group website, or you just view it as like you have a pail, your level of energy is a bucket and it's filled with water. And each day, each week, there's a certain fixed level that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And so how you build the awareness to kind of know where you sit on a given day, on a given week is important for all activity, but it's especially important when you decide what sort of exercise you're going to be doing. And again, this is, people who kind of know what the heck they're talking about with exercise at this point, they're recommending this approach kind of to whoever anyway.
To everybody.
And so okay. You'll often hear to it referred to as RPE based training, or rate of perceived exertion. So whether you're doing conditioning or lifting, you're trying to just basically rank how you're feeling on a scale of 1 to 10, again, on a given day or a given week. And you want to try to match how you're feeling with that amount of exercise.
Makes sense.
So if you know that you can do X or Y on the rower or X or Y on just a stationary bike or whatever the case, the goal is to try and not surpass how you're ultimately feeling. And it's way easier said than done.
Right.
But because you always think of exercise as this continual process of overreaching, and you have to push and you have to try to surpass what your capabilities are to move the needle, to get stronger, to put on muscle. But really, as long as you're doing your best to match what you're bringing to the table on a given day, then that's what you got to do. If that means that you were supposed to do 4 sets of 10 on the leg extension and 20 minutes on the elliptical, if it's a day where your bucket is half full, it's 1 or 2 sets of 10. It's 10 minutes on the elliptical. It's less weight. Trying to get to the point where you're not afraid to deviate to match how you're feeling, and then on the flip side, there's a day that you feel great. And it doesn't mean you push to the limits, or you push like somebody who does not have this syndrome.
Right.
But you at least then say, maybe I'm going to go a little bit heavier on the 4 sets of 10. Or I'm going to try to walk for an additional 10 minutes after all of this, on a given day. Or, I have more energy for, some of the tasks around the house that I've had to put off because of how I'm feeling. So it's super hard. It's all subjective measures of how you're feeling.
Learning to have grace for yourself when you don't have it, and being in tune with what your body is telling you so that you can respond in kind. Wow. That seems like an awareness that everybody should have, but especially if they're dealing with chronic fatigue syndrome.
Definitely.
Set different goals than the average person.
Yeah.
I think that's a key thing. You're trying to get your body up to the ability to do basic tasks. You're not necessarily trying to train your body it's not even about true typical health exercise at that point. You're trying to just get back to what other people consider a baseline in a lot of cases.
So Christiana is asking about supplementation, and obviously she listened to your dad, so she's been around for a while. What can we do to help her there? Is there anything in particular, or is it just...
Yeah, I think that it's like everything else is individualized. I think to start, you always hear B12 for energy. Okay, if your B12 level's low. You hear about iron for energy. Yes, if your iron level's low. So I think those are always 2 things that always kind of catch. Yes, if those levels are low, then those things are going to help you with energy. So I think those are things that you can get tested, and I think are very critical for anybody suffering with lack of energy for any reason. But again, it's the testing of them. It's not necessarily the supplementing right off the bat. Now, along those lines, though, to differentiate between B12 and B complex, the whole family of Bs, why you hear B is a 12, there's many of them, is critical for base level energy production, not in a stimulant variety, but just for basic energy production in the body. Helps to, in a basic sense, turn carbs, proteins, fats into energy. For example, B vitamins, B6 can convert an amino acid that your body has broken down from a protein into a neurotransmitter, which can help with energy levels, etc. So I think those are critical things to at least be adding, especially because, again, so much of this is this cascade. Well, if you have trouble doing basic tasks around the home, what is a major task around the home? Cooking and food. So what you end up doing, grabbing handfuls of pretzels instead of making a meal, grabbing a handful of, maybe if you can at least start to make improvements, a handful of almonds or fruit instead of a handful of pretzels. But those things become, have you gone to the grocery store? I mean, this is what we're talking about in a lot of these cases. So I think then the cascade becomes you're eating worse. So then, it's like the need for B vitamins does go up if you have a poor diet, if you're skipping breakfast, if you're grabbing that handful, all you've had is a handful of pretzels and chips that day. So I do think, again, the bar for who needs a B complex does fluctuate based on what your diet is like. And you can infer in a lot of these cases that there is some dietary limitations for various reasons.
Yeah.
So the iron and B12 we kind of covered, get those checked. More specifically though, there are some adaptogenic herbs that have been shown to help. With varying success, eleuthero, schizanda berry, licorice roots, rhodiola. Those are all different herbs that can be combined in individual products to help. We have a product, Cortisol Advanced, that combines those. It's a little more targeted to the fatigue, a little more stimulatory versus Adrenal Essentials that we carry. It's more rhodiola, relora based. It's a little more about stress adaptation. So if you are looking for something like that or dealing with that, the Cortisol Advanced is a little more geared towards chronic fatigue.
Okay.
And then very foundational things, omega-3s. They're foundational pieces to brain and nervous system health. They're anti-inflammatory. That can help with different types of pain. They also have shown to have mood and cognitive benefits. So I think, again, going back to the whole cascade of this, your diet may be poor. Are you likely to be going to the grocery store and cooking fresh fish? So maybe you have very limited omega-3s in your diet. The bar for you, maybe you have a lot of inflammation in your body. Your bar for needing an omega-3 supplement can go up in these cases. Again, you're looking at a picture of everything. Vitamin D, critical immunomodulator. That's a foundational thing to everybody's health, really, but especially if you've got potential for what's an autoimmune condition. If you're having muscle pain and weakness, specifically, CoQ10 and L-carnitine can help. Again, that's another one. Hey, CoQ10 for energy. Well, it can help with muscular energy in certain cases, particularly whenever you've got a deficiency or you've got that weakness. Maybe you're on a statin medication that's potentially causing it, et cetera.
Sure.
So that's something you can look at again for muscle. Nootropics, those are kind of the new cutting edge things.
Okay.
With a lot of these types of things, for me personally, I do kind of lean on some of the companies that we work with. We've worked with them for years. We've added them, dropped some along the way. But until they're really on board with them, or until we find something that's really black or white and irrefutable, it's not something that personally I can speak to real positively or negatively. But I know they kind of come up again when you're looking for something that can be kind of stimulant based. If you're looking for energy, those can kind of come up. So at least just did want to touch on those. Don't really have a lot to say on them yet, but I think as time goes on, more and more, if they are valid, I think will start to come out. So that's again where I go supplement wise. I think with the medications, there are different angles you can take. I think that this would get more personalized as well.
Yeah.
There are, there's the anticonvulsant type medications that are like Lyrica and gabapentin. If you've got more nerve pain, they can also delve in if you've got nerve pain and sleep issues, because they can be a little sedating. So certain pain medications, without going into jumping to the narcotics, like I mentioned,
right, you
can still do something like an anticonvulsant med, technically is what it is, but that has shown to work for these things. And again, we're going down the cascade of that you've tried other things and so there's also a medication like Cymbalta. It is a pretty heavy medication and it can even be hard to get off of, but something, again, if you've worked through other options, it is an SSRI and an SNRI. So it's worked not just on serotonin, but also in norepinephrine. So you can have a little bit of that stimulatory benefit because it's inhibiting the reuptake of norepinephrine as well. So versus another traditional SSRI, that can have a dual side benefit, also has been helped for pain. So you may have chronic fatigue that has depression, that has some pain, maybe some nerve pain or chronic unexplained pain, and you're dealing with the fatigue. Something like Cymbalta can potentially help and touch multiple of those areas. So I think that therapies do become very individualized in that regard as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it. Okay. Well, but that's still good. That's a lot of good options, a lot of things that she can further research and talk to her doctor about. Christiane, thank you so much. Good luck with this. Just to recap real quickly, you were talking about rate of perceived exertion. Would you call it energy envelope, or how do you say
energy envelope theory? Yes.
Probably worth looking up and seeing if you can find some of that to apply in your exercising. And then you mentioned, see if I got these all, B's, cortisol advanced, omega-3s, vitamin D, CoQ10, and then several different medications as well. She would talk to her. Cool. All right. Hopefully that helps. I'm sure there's somebody else out there also that is dealing with this. So we covered about everything we could on that. So that was good. That was very, very thorough.